it's just my face just I look like a giant compared to the two of you. Like you're just two
Maybe
tiny
you
little
are.
men, and I am an
Maybe you're-
overlord.
If this is in the episode, everyone, this is what Alanah says to us before every recording. Is,
I need you to know that I am a giant compared to both of you.
you're a tiny
You are both
little man.
replaceable.
I'm a giant compared to you. That's what you say every single
I
time.
will-
I think it's cruel.
I will have Grant Kirkhope
God.
on my channel every time Austin misses an episode.
Seriously, the
Easily.
retribution so instantaneous.
To be clear, it was unrelated.
My audio is massively
clearly
blown out
not.
at the beginning of the recording, and I apologise.
It's what?
My audio is massively blown out at the start of the recording. I'm just
I
apologising.
love that
now.
for us. This is going great. Everything's fine.
It's professional. It's a professional podcast. Professional podcast.
It was interesting talking to Grant versus you, Austin, because his approach to talking about things was so different. And he kept being like, I don't know, I'm not some like intellectual composer like Austin Wintory. It's like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, Grant is the sort of king of self-deprecation, I guess.
It's a
He's
very
always-
British thing, in fairness.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's always from literally the first time we ever met, it was a nonstop onslaught of comments like that. You know, it's just, well, I mean, it's not like I know what I'm talking about, but I blah, 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 or whatever. And meanwhile, as we stand around some convention and people come up to him just exploding and fawning over him like I don't have a childhood that's
Pretty much what I said to him. Yeah.
that's Grant free. It's a non sequitur.
It's interesting talking to somebody like Grant Kirkhope. For anyone listening who doesn't know, Grant Kirkhope was a composer at Rare in the 90s.
Most
worked
known
on-
for the TikTok GoldenEye pause
Yes.
music.
The pause music that went viral. Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Perfect Dark, GoldenEye, DK Rap, and then went on to do Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle, and I think that's what he's working on right now. And Kings of Amalur, and a whole bunch of stuff. And yeah, I recently interviewed him on the channel. And it was funny the amount of comments that I got from people who didn't understand his Yorkshire accent. He speaks really fast, and they're like, I don't know what he's saying. But it is funny to think about that, who those people are going to be now. I feel like there are so many female musicians right now who are very popular, people who are younger than I am, who credit Justin Bieber for so much that it's like, damn. Like there's, you know about that family who all of the children, there were maybe like 9 of them or something, were all locked in one house for their whole lives and never allowed out, sometimes chained to beds.
I mean, I remember there have been various stories along these lines. I think it was in like Vienna or somewhere. There was a story of someone who was locked, like a family that was trapped for decades. But I don't remember as many as 9.
I could be wrong about the amount. It was a lot of kids though. And yeah, they were locked and chained to their beds while their parents were like out living, their dream lives. And these kids didn't know any
that's
different. But one of the weirdest parts of it was that the parents would buy loads of toys and clothing for children, but would never actually let their children wear any of them. And it's like the idea that they really wanted to present as though they had this happy family and fantasize about it, but they were actually literally chaining their children to beds, and they were never allowed to go outside. They're all malnourished. They can't speak properly. And one of them eventually broke out and called the police. She had like managed to get a phone.
Pretty sure Brie Larson won an Oscar for this adaptation of this story.
Oh, really?
I mean, I'm kidding, but she did. Did you not see
'Cause
Room?
I was like, oh, right. I have not seen Room, no. Because
That's
it seems
basically
horrific.
the premise of this movie, except
Yeah.
that
This
it's not
show's
9
gone
of them.
through some tonal changes over the last couple of years.
Well, I'm
I'll be
circling
honest.
back to Justin Bieber is that the girl who broke out and called the police, she credited finding Justin Bieber to realizing that there was a world outside of her house that she really wanted to find. And she had like
Jesus.
seen 2 of his music videos and basically like internet fell in love with him. And that was her motivation for breaking out of the house and getting all of her siblings out.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not a bad contribution to the world on his part, then, I
know.
suppose.
Not so bad. Like Billie Eilish always talks about Justin Bieber. And mine's Grant Kirkhope. So
What you're
everybody's
describing,
got one.
basically, Alanah, is aging. Is suddenly you notice that like there's been 2-3 generations since you were a kid, and it's
Yeah,
a
you might be
horrifying
right.
experience.
I've only just
Yeah.
noticed. Yeah.
Yeah, Yeah,
I mean,
it gets worse with age.
But like, I love Miyamoto, and I think that we all do. And I don't know that there's a Miyamoto 2 yet, unless it's Kojima. But I don't know that they're far enough apart.
I mean, to a kid nowadays, it's more likely to be Notch, isn't it? Or like that kind of generation.
Yeah,
which
because there isn't really a
Even that-
Fortnite version of that.
I was going to say,
there
even
isn't really
Notch is like
an
a generation
auteur
ago.
out in public around Fortnite, is it? Fortnite doesn't really.
It's
I mean,
epic.
obviously, it has a director, it has game designers and directors,
But I don't feel like they're
I wouldn't
known in
say-
the way Notch is.
Yeah, it's not out there in the same way.
And I know, like, Roblox, I'm sure I've said this on the show before about how uncomfortable I find it that Roblox makes so much money and is consuming so many children's time to the extent that some people are considering it like child labor law issues with Roblox. But
I mean,
no
yeah,
adults I know use it.
Yeah,
Or
there's
understand
anyone who watch. I'm sure a lot of people who watch this as well. But People Make Games have done a couple of videos on it, which were fascinating. In
On
terms of,
Roblox?
like, there's about Roblox. Yeah, there's literally like a marketplace of like you say, 14-year-olds basically making content, which is then sold, and then they don't actually make. There's basically a cut being taken by the company that makes the game from that, and at that point you kind of are employing children, or you're at least in business with children, which is legally a very, very, very.
Isn't that the
gray
same
area.
though? I mean, if there's a difference, like Etsy or eBay hosting people's ability to sell their stuff is not the same as employing them. Isn't this more analogous
Sure,
to
but
that?
you legally wouldn't, as Etsy wouldn't. Etsy will absolutely, in their terms of service, say you must be
Have to
over
be over
18
18
to have a credit card.
That's a
in
fair
our
point.
system.
I don't
That's the
know how
difference.
that
Roblox
works.
is different because there's an in-game currency that people
So that's what
pay
you
them.
earn?
So
You're
there's a
earning the in-game
separation.
currency and then just spending again?
And then you can cash out your in-game currency, but there's some fantastically weird rules about how that's done. It's definitely worth watching the much the much more knowledgeable people than me talking about it. But yeah, the people Make Games.
I would like
great
to.
channel
I
in
feel like I
general,
don't know
but,
enough
yeah.
about Roblox.
That's
It's
power.
an hour of just a deep dive interviews
down.
with the
I will
developers.
watch that.
You'd be into it, I think.
Yeah.
You'd like that. Yeah.
that game is probably the number one example of sort of, I guess it's from aging, but whatever it is that makes me have that epiphany one day where I realize there's like 100 million kids and multi-billion-dollar thing that's just 100% off my radar. I think a lot of folks my age, that's Roblox has been that one where you just go, it's like when there's some pop star that wins, the song of the year at the Grammys, and you're like, I've never heard of this person. And they just literally apparently had the number one, achievement this year in music. And I just literally
Totally. They have different
it come fit-
celebrities,
sorry, go on.
kids these days.
Yeah.
No, I'm just going to say, like, there are TikTok stars that I don't know who are, like, on Ellen in the same way that an actor used to be. And it's like, I'm not that demographic anymore.
even like gamer YouTubers. I was introduced to Ninja at something, and I had no idea who he was, and I was just chatting away like to this like quite shy kid. This was a few years ago, but like just the number of like big YouTubers who you meet
Totally.
now, who like you find out later are big names, but like to you were just a kid, and an interesting enough kid that you talk to. It's weird. We're getting old, and it's horrible. And I
You know
hate
that
it.
Andy Warhol quote that, and I sadly don't remember the quote, so I'm going to misquote it while referencing a quote. Something along the lines of, in the future, everybody will be famous for a minute.
15.
Yeah,
15
and I
minutes, yeah.
feel like that's pretty
Or
well
seconds.
true.
it's 15 minutes of fame.
It's 15 minutes.
I didn't realize that Andy Warhol was the origin of that.
Well, I don't know
expression.
if that is the exact same as the 15 minutes of fame claim, or if they come from different. But he said it. In
I
any
think
case.
it was an observation he made. I'm gonna have to Google that. Austin, you already Googled.
I
that,
feel
so
like
save
it's-
my fingers if you
It's correct. No, I can't because of the way I'm recording today. I can't pull up
I
any
think
screens.
it's a Warhol, but the reality is every quote is not from the person you think it is.
That's true.
Uh,
But it feels like it's correct that
I'm gonna get
it's a
credited with
quotation
that.
misattributed to him. Yes.
There you go.
It was said. It was two other people said it in reference to his work, like they were taking the piss out of him, basically, from the sounds of it. If I'm reading this right. But yes.
That's the ultimate long-term win that he then gets credited with the quote that's that's
I,
being
you
used
know
to
what? I don't
criticize
think
them.
it was sarcastic. I think he was quoting someone in a program for one of his galleries, but that's faded from history. But anyway, I think you are right, Alanah. I think we are at that stage now where,
Well,
for better or worse,
there are so many people who are famous in so many different ways that you might never have heard of them, and I feel like that just keeps getting more and more varied, and that like there could be somebody who's famous for being on Netflix, but then there's somebody who's famous for being on Hulu, and people don't have access to all of the same shows even. And then there are like YouTubers that sometimes I've met at parties who I'll go on to find out of 10 million subscribers or whatever, and I'm like, what? There's so many of them in a way that like we all have these different people who are famous for different subcultures. Like last week or maybe earlier this week, the people who are the two best, I'm not qualified to talk about this, I don't know about it, it was just a friend is very into it, speedrunners for Spelunky, one of whom is American and one of whom is, I believe, Korean. They have like a community around the speedrunners who like try to, I don't know if you've ever played Spelunky, but it's fucking hard. I love it though. Who get through the game as fast as they can or whatever. And the Korean guy, I believe, is like very involved in the community of Spelunky speedrunners, but the American guy is not. Even though he's very successful and they would all know of him, he's not actually like involved in that community and doesn't necessarily talk to them. And he recently did a stream where he did like public matchmaking, and the Korean guy happened to match with the American guy. So for the first time ever, those two are playing Spelunky together live, and that whole community is freaking out like it's the best thing that's ever happened to them, like this holy grail moment that they've been waiting for such a long time, that to us is like, oh, these two guys play Spelunky together? Like it's something that you just can't even... I wouldn't have even known about it if I didn't just have one friend who's very into Spelunky, and I find that kind of cool, like how diverse our subcultures have gotten. Like,
I think that's part of what this ties back to what you asked about what is the thing, what is the game that 10 years from now or 15 years from now the young adults will be saying that was the foundation of my childhood. And I feel like there won't probably be one sort of the way that the N64 seems to have cast such a massively long shadow when it first came out, and so many of the things like GoldenEye, like Mario 64, Mario Kart, that
Mario
really
Party.
just don't, that really was such a huge part of so many millions of people's kind of consciousness forming as they emerge out of adolescence around that time. Right now, the options are so wide, and there's, like you said, there's someone who can have 50 million followers on TikTok that outside of those 50 million people, no one has ever heard of. So they're hugely seminal for, the upbringing. If these people are kids now, they'll look back at some TikTok person and go, they changed my life. I'm a musician now because of them, or I'm an actor because of them, or blah, blah, blah. And we've never heard of them. And I feel like because of the way technology, there's so few gatekeepers, and there's also just fewer things, or more things rather. There were fewer things, whereas before it was, gaming wise at least, you had N64, you had Genesis, Saturn,
the N64
PC games,
is also interesting there because the N64 didn't actually sell that well. It's that the party games worked for 4 kids to go to somebody's house and play them at once. You only needed one friend to have an N64 for you to have that be a cool party of childhood with like Mario Party and Mario
Did
Kart.
it not sell well?
It did, but not as well as you would think, considering how pivotal we place it as. Yeah, like let me look up.
Yeah, it was so
sales
huge to me that, and all my friends, well, no, not all my friends, but there was definitely like 2 or 3 of us that had it, and therefore...
Everyone had it.
Everybody had their go because,
Yeah.
we would all pass them around. And obviously 4-player GoldenEye, I saw somebody respond on Twitter in response to the Grant thing where they were like, this can only be solved by, license to kill on slappers only or something like that. And I thought, I once upon a time, I would have been unbeatable. And now I'm like, this, old man yells at clouds I played GoldenEye on an N64 a couple of years ago for the first time in ages, and I was like, holy shit, I'm bad at this now.
No, it's also just terrible. Like, thank God for Rare Replay, which is so good because it's also hard to go back and play Banjo-Kazooie on the N64. It's hard to play all those games. Jet Force Gemini was terrible until they brought it out on Rare Replay, and now it's actually playable. So for reference, the Nintendo 64 now has sold 32 million units, which is a lot, but I feel like I need to get other consoles to compare that to.
Yeah, give us like PS4 comparisons.
PS4 was like a couple of hundred or something, right? Like
Yeah.
A couple of hundred?
Yeah, just
feel
like
like I'm
200
right.
people have PS4s.
No, I know you mean
they
million, but
definitely
I'm
broke
saying
100 million. PlayStation 4, I'm sure, broke 100
PS2
million.
is 155 million.
Yeah.
wow. Well,
sounds
my
right.
sense of calibration
PS4 116.
that shocks
Oh,
me
really?
because
Oh, I'm wrong then. So it's not. It was actually lower PS4.
Yeah,
116.
PS2 is still the highest selling. And then
Oh,
the
cool.
DS
Okay.
family, and then the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color. So if I get the big ones, PlayStation 4 is 116, Nintendo Switch is 92, PlayStation 3 is 87, Xbox 360 is 84.
Wow.
So like that paints a picture of how far down the Nintendo 64 is. Funnily enough, Nintendo 64 is below Game & Watch.
you know you know what I find strange about those statistics is that when a game, a God of War, or Last of Us, or Ghost of Tsushima comes out and they talk about, we sold 10 million units or 15 million units, it's crazy to think how small that is of the overall console base. I would have thought that those numbers would be closer together, and therefore my assumption was that the total console sales, the number of units, like if 50 million people own PS4s and of those 15 million bought, Last of Us or something, that feels like it kind of scans to me. But the idea that it would be those numbers against 110
I want to look at what the highest selling
surprising.
PS4
I don't
Also,
know why
remember
I
the differences in how we count
exclusive.
sales. So
I was
in
thinking
terms
that.
yeah.
So the
Not
highest selling.
a sale isn't a sale in terms
Yeah,
of
because
like
it
the
was sold
metrics
to a
that get
store.
printed.
I do get that. We have
And
the
also
same
the
issue.
timeline as well, right? Like the timeline, you have a console, you might buy a PS4 at launch, but then by the time the big hitting games at the end of its life cycle are coming out, you've moved on, or you've left home, or you've passed it on to a partner or a sibling, and they're not going to buy the same games as you. Like it's not just a money thing; it's a time thing as well. It's when
just as a
when
measure
you were
of-
into it.
As a measure of ecosystem, though, it's just surprising to me that there could be that many PS4s floating around, and yet so few of those,
You've got to
like one mega hit title being itself a surprisingly small concentration of that overall pool.
Yeah, I agree. Because
it's
especially
unintuitive.
to us, they seem so big. So I don't know if this is including PC sales, but supposedly God of War has sold 19.5 million copies. I had thought that Spider-Man was the highest selling, but this list, this is just Wikipedia, so it's obviously not a great source, says God of War is the highest selling at 19.5 million, but that's compared to 116 million owners. That it does seem it's not even 50%. It's so
it's
low.
a few things. So it's also resale. Remember, so a lot of if you think about how big the secondhand market is as well, you can probably
That's
double
true.
that number just to start with, especially with a
double it?
single-player
That's what
game
the
where
Days
people
Gone
go
director
off.
did.
No
Is that what explained those numbers disparities? Is that what that meant?
Well, it wasn't the Gone Home thing,
he-
just that it was like sold.
Days Gone. He
predominantly at
based it
discount.
on how many trophies people had gotten.
Ah, interesting.
Oh, is that right? Oh,
Yeah, which means he
well,
was
yes,
doubling or something. It was discounting the amount of people who would have bought the game secondhand.
Sounds like so. In
Borrowed
other words,
it.
it was an apples to oranges comparison then, because it's like if you're comparing trophy numbers to first-hand market sales units, you're not really getting
I
a
strongly
clean...
believe that if they have sold 8 million units, Sony would have done the thing that Sony does every time a game sells 8 million units. I don't know why they're so focused on 8 million. Well, they would have said something. They would have tweeted it out, but they didn't.
It could also, though, another thing that's worth remembering, and this is something that's often forgotten with video game sales statistics, is there's a difference between your sales, like initially during like the period where you would be marketing, and then the kind of slow sales afterwards. So it's possible that it didn't hit. If it did hit 8 million,
In the
which
time
I
frame
don't
they
know,
wanted. That's fair.
It didn't hit it. It hit it after they'd done a discount on the PS. On
Right,
PSN
and that game had
50% off
a
or
lot of
whatever.
sales.
It could have been, it could have been that they hit that milestone at a point where they would be inviting kind of critics and commentators to go, well, yes, it sold 8 million, but look at what there might have been a marketing decision not to. You don't tend to boast about your numbers years after release or even 6 months after release, because
it only came
you're on your tail.
They did it with Ghost of Tsushima, and Days Gone and Ghost of Tsushima did not release that far apart. Did they release in the same year? No, Days Gone was the year before.
Days Gone was
maybe the other ends of the year.
Was before it, I thought, by at least a year or two.
Yeah, I think it might have been the year before, because I think Ghost of Tsushima came out in June, July. Oh god,
like it was summer.
God, Ghost of Tsushima release date.
It's definitely summer because I played it.
Days Gone was April 2019.
Okay, they are a year apart then. Ghost of Tsushima was July 17, 2020, and I know Last of Us was like a month beforehand. It was June.
Right.
Yeah. So every number you've ever, or
fair.
every
They may
number
have
someone
hit
in the
it,
audience
but in
has
a
ever
different
heard is
circumstance.
usually not the total number. It's like the number that happened early in the release of the thing when they were still marketing
When they cared.
and pushing it.
It's like how I remember, how famously the Elizabeth Taylor Cleopatra from the 60s was like one of the biggest flops in all of history. It was massively epically expensive movie at the time and essentially lost its shirt. And but I remember seeing a headline in like 2010 or something that said, as of today, that movie has broken even, which was it was something like that. I don't remember when that. I probably have way off on what year that was, but I remember saying it's like over half a century of DVD sales or whatever, and like playing on cable and license fees every few years. It very slowly.
That's awesome.
Earned back its money.
And you can see these platforms. If you're a AAA studio, or a platform holder that's making AAA games, you do need to find as much revenue as you can, because they're only getting more expensive. Which makes decisions to port to PC, for example, make some sense in that context. That you've got to get as much revenue out the back end of a game as you can.
But it just goes to show that
so
semantically, we would still consider Cleopatra a failure, even if the
it's not
books
anymore.
say it actually isn't. Though it just took an ungodly amount of time. That's to your point, like a game that sort of has a rough start. But this is where it's interesting, because you yourself talk about how Thomas Was Alone didn't explode out of the gate, but I don't think we look at that and say it's a failure. So why is there something like Bastion was famously the same thing? It took a Steam either summer or fall sale.
I think it launched in a summer sale.
It was also
a summer
on
sale
Xbox.
that boosted it, but I think it spawned. I think that was its first time on sale on Xbox.
It was on Summer of Arcade or whatever it was called.
Whatever it was,
Arcade,
it launched weekly, and then once it had some initial little sale after a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever it was, and it reached its critical mass, and then the word of mouth blew up, and then suddenly it became Bastion.
So
the game we
the
know
reality is, if Bastion or Thomas Was Alone were sold were made by big studios with investors, they would be seen as failures. It's only because those games exist outside of a hyper-capitalized,
it didn't matter to those
invested
studios.
company in corporation. Yeah. If they'd happened at big places, that would be seen as a failure.
Did Journey blow
by
up immediately,
definition, you
Austin?
just spent a lot.
Journey broke PlayStation Network week 1 sales records.
Wow. How?
Because it was one of those, I think, where it helped that the reviews were
Tens.
just like they were just like stupid. They were you couldn't pay for reviews like this, and
Correct. You couldn't.
It was,
And God knows we've tried.
no, I mean it was literally like if you paid someone to do it, they would write something less impassioned than the actual one. It was so wild how strong the response was, and then people just shot out of the gate. Because I don't know how much pre-launch hype it had. There was definitely curiosity because it was out there. It was announced. I had written a blog entry for the PlayStation blog about the music like 2 months before it came out.
And Flow had been well received as well, right? Like,
and Flower considerably more so. I mean, Flower.
Oh, did Flower come out before Journey?
Yeah.
Flower was the middle.
In my head, that's the other way around. Interesting. Okay.
Now, we did Flow in 2005 initially as students, and then as a PS3 launch title that we were late for. In 2006, dripping over into 7, and then they jumped straight into Flower, and they did Flower, which came out in 2009, and then we immediately started work on Journey, and it took 3 years and came out in 2012. So
you
yeah,
had a bit of momentum behind you, which is great. You had the marketing of Sony, and you had great reviews because your game was excellent, obviously. So it's kind of those things kind of gave you, that kind of rolling snowball of success, right?
And it was also obviously, 2012, the volume of titles coming out on a daily basis was a fraction of what it is now. So I always look at it and I say, Journey was very much a right place, right time. I think where that, that exact game today would, probably have to fight a lot harder to get found, and it's just one of many things that makes me occasionally go, holy shit, how lucky, how sort of nothing any of us can take credit for that those variables came to. Another hilarious thing as a side note is, because the game is so sparse in its content, in terms of like there's no text or voiceover or it's so just visuals and audio, and the audio is so dominated by the music. I remember we had prepared these tracks for a soundtrack album. I'd edited the in-game music to make a hopefully a nice album, and we were sitting on it, and Genova goes, I think we shouldn't release the album the same day as the game, because if someone were to listen to the album and then play the game, it's kind of a spoiler. Like, because it walks you through the game leans on the emotions provided by the music so much that you're basically getting half the game handed to you without the other half, as opposed to normally when a soundtrack would probably be less than half the total experience on a typical game. But this was an unusual one. So he's like, I feel like it's sort of emotionally a spoiler, so we should give the album, give the game a week or two and then put the album out just to let people experience the game properly. And he was trying to sort of control the consumption. And the hilarious side effect of that was that because the game just happened to have this crazy launch, when we hit the button, the album exploded because it had 2 weeks worth of sales compressed into the first day, essentially. It was one of those things that I was like, that's another one of those that in hindsight, I don't think I could possibly duplicate that even with all the planning in the world to create this sort of pent up pressure in that way, especially because now, someone will go into the game files and it will end up online regardless. So you have to be the first to market if you want to try to at least catch this. The same reason why I put all my stuff on YouTube immediately, because I'm like, better at my channel than someone else's, because they will. And I don't mind. Like they're not really doing any measurable damage by doing so. But back then, it was a little different. And
it's super interesting. That's you're right that, I mean, Journey is incredible, but even the variable of the way that Sony was approaching indies at the time is a factor in that Journey couldn't have existed with the funding necessarily if that landscape weren't exactly built to be the exact way that it was. I didn't realize it blew up that fast, because that seems like a game like a Bastion that would be a word of mouth game. But I remember the reviews.
The third installment, with utter respect to be clear, and it's an amazing game, but it was the third game from what was a Sony production process at that point. Like, but I don't feel like people know the other two. Like, I don't want to adjudicate the word indie, but it obviously had this enormous marketing support and enormous production support from Sony.
Well, they were published, so indie. We've said that before.
Exactly. Like, you can go crazy trying to work, do those lines. But my point is, there was definitely a boost it had, which is great.
I think I wouldn't overestimate how much Flower helped launch it. I know it did help, but Flower wildly eclipsed Flow's sales, and Journey wildly eclipsed Flower's sales. Like, each one was, I'm making this up, but each one was seemingly an order of magnitude bigger than the one before.
I wouldn't have thought that
116 million units, I think Journey sold.
Exactly, yeah.
And it was a 100% attach rate on the console.
Everyone. So I just looked it up out of curiosity.
Who would eventually buy a piece of PS4 got it.
To touch to that, so the Nintendo Switch has sold 92.87 million units. It's catching up to the Wii.
Is that all SKUs of the Switch?
It's catching up. God, it feels like it surely would have surpassed the Wii. That's also surprising to me.
The Wii has 101. The Wii's so successful.
So they're basically on parity with each other. Yeah. That's more
Wii was
successful than I thought the
profound.
Wii was, and that's less successful than I thought
the
the
Wii
Switch
was a home console for everybody's mums. Like it was
Your grand bought a
such
Wii.
so
Yeah.
successful.
It
But
just shows you how much our circle of friends are horrible barometers of this, because I feel like no one that I talk to on a regular basis, with very few people, had Wiis, and I feel like everyone I know has a Switch.
you know what? I didn't have a Wii. My mom did, so I used my mom's Wii.
I didn't have one either until someone gave me one for Christmas, like my in-laws. So it was one of those where I was always a Nintendo fan, but somehow the Wii I'd had a GameCube,
It
it had
wasn't
a
marketed
64,
Only
to us.
console
NES,
I've ever
SNES.
queued for at launch day was a Wii. weirdly.
Really, you did? Because the Wii
It shows
was,
how none of us know. None of us are in a position
it's
to kind
mainstream
of take the
successful.
temperature.
That's the difference. It's
right.
like when we talk about it, I feel like you talk about like thinking right now the PS4. If you would have asked like your average hardcore gamer who's not looked at the stats, I feel like PS4, it's got to be up there. The Xbox 360, the PS3, but it's actually the Wii and the Game Boy way higher because they were more appealing to more people. Like video games aren't niche, but are at the same time. In a way that-
Nintendo as well occupies its own game industry
For sure.
next door to the other game industry, in fairness.
Yeah, so the Nintendo
play by
Switch,
their own rules.
92 million sales. Software sales is 681 million. But then the highest
That's a good
selling,
attach rate. That's a really good attach rate,
I agree.
actually. Like,
The
genuinely,
highest
like,
selling
most games
Nintendo
consoles don't
Switch
achieve that.
game is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with 38.7 million sales.
Wow,
So that is like
that's a shit ton of title.
that's over a third. It's the attach rate
But
for
that's
that
why
is
you buy a Switch,
tremendous.
isn't it?
Yeah, and
Like,
then
to an
Animal
extent,
Crossing.
that's why the
is-
mainstream buys a Switch, is to buy the big first-party games.
But again,
and
I
then
would have thought
obviously
that
indie does
PlayStation
well
was
'cause we
the
fill in the
same.
gaps. I'd say PlayStation. Well,
Madden.
you buy a PlayStation for the first parties, but you also buy it
Call
for
of
your
Duty.
FIFAs, for your
Yeah.
Call of Duty, for your GTA.
Yeah.
Like it's not. You're not as beholden to the platform holder for your. I would say even though Sony's first party is excellent, obviously it's not the only draw to owning a PlayStation for the average consumer.
Yeah,
I have to say though, a few
I know
years
people who
ago,
have a PS4 just say could watch Netflix back in the day before every TV had smart TV. Like that was totally a thing.
that was actually why my PS4 or 3 was I bought
Blu-ray.
as a Blu-ray player, kind of with equal measure as the fact that I was a gamer and also working on PS3 games. Like I still thought I don't need a separate peripheral. This pays for itself on that basis alone.
It was super common that people did that, bought it as a Blu-ray player. Even though that wasn't that the Blu-ray version super expensive. No, it was the backwards compatible.
The whole
version.
thing
That's
felt
what they
very.
had.
I remember at the time
That's the
feeling like,
backwards
"Holy
thing.
crap, this is brutal." But what I was about to say is regarding those first party titles. It is interesting how that is sort of the whole point, right? Of having first party is to help really kind of incentivize the console purchase, and then theoretically, then you're going to have a higher likelihood of getting your cross-platform games on the PS4, 5,
Right.
whatever. And I remember a few years ago they did a concert, the Royal Philharmonic in London did a show called PlayStation in Concert at the Royal Albert Hall. That was like a retrospective of music from PS 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I was there. I was very lucky they were playing some of my music, but the lineup of pieces where you think, God, it's crazy to think that all of these were exclusives. From the history of the God of War franchise, and what else was on that concert? Uncharted, of course, The Last of Us.
Bit of Killzone. Was there a bit of Killzone?
I feel like there was.
There's Ratchet,
and,
Crash Bandicoot. Like, yeah, there's a whole
Metal
lot of great
Gear,
games on there. Metal Gear.
It
Was Metal Gear ever an exclusive?
every
Yeah, I
August
guess
on to the
Snake
Rapture.
Eater was. They were for a while, weren't they?
I think they were initially, yeah. I love Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. I was a huge fan of that game. It's like it had such
me
an effect
too.
on me, like in a way that I just didn't expect. I really, really enjoyed it.
God, me too.
it's
I consider myself a Chinese Room fan because Dear Esther had the same effect, but in a more muted way. And then it was like they figured out, they like perfected their formula for Rapture, and it sort of took all the things I loved about Dear Esther and kind of blew it up into something just so. And dear Lord, Jess Curry, what a score she wrote for that game.
It's so
truly,
unsettling in a very, I don't know, delightful, adventurous way.
Rapture.
Yeah.
It's funny. To me, it's
weird-
like soul affirming. I wouldn't have a million years thought to label it as unsettling.
I
but
found
I
that
can
game
see-
super unsettling, and so when the score kicked in, I was like, oh,
No soul. That's why.
so interesting.
It reminded you of
that I don't have a soul. Yeah, I was unsettled by that.
That's my read. I have a weird memory of because I think that came out around the time it might have been Volume, but we were doing a lot of the same press events. I just have a weird memory of sitting with all the Chinese room people eating like little lunches in a little room because press were having a nice meal and we were all like sat backstage like with these little cardboard box meals. I just have this strange, the least glamorous experience of my career.
That's really funny. Yeah,
That's my
they're a
only
good
memory
crew.
of that game. Basically, is doing
The
press
little
tours
lunch
with
you
them.
had. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's also weird to me now to think about the fact that in the 360 era, Mass Effect and BioShock were both 360 exclusives.
Oh, they weren't they?
That's like
In terms of consoles, though, because I played both on PC.
correct. And then obviously they still came to PS4 anyway.
Were they Xbox exclusives? Like PC came
right,
later?
I wouldn't be
In my
surprised
memory,
if both of them came to PC at the same time. I just mean console exclusives. Let me
They were
have a
doing
look.
console exclusives. Yeah.
That is
that's-
weird to think.
So weird that was part of the brand. I'm thinking that about PlayStation. If I hadn't thought about that before. That some of these exclusive game sales are lower than the install base by a significant margin. It's partly got to be, like we said, it's people playing Madden and FIFA and Call of Duty and all the actually huge games that everybody forgets about on the street. And I wonder if that's just part of the branding of like, you can look at those Sony first party games, even if you aren't going to play them as part of a brand, it makes it seem very serious and mature for a lot of them. And I wonder if that's the thing where even if people aren't going to buy those things, it's valuable to Sony or to PlayStation to be like, well, yeah, but this is the identity of this brand. It's mature. We have gritty video games, even if they know they're not going to buy them.
I've talked about this before, right? That each of the consoles has a date of birth in terms of like its age and its targets. So PlayStation has been targeting the exact same core audience since, the guy who was coming home from the club for PS1. So all of the first party stuff, the spend on that was all very much tied to club culture.
Yeah.
At least in Europe. I don't know if that was the same in America, but in Europe, all of that was targeted at that. Then the PS2 comes and that person is like a young professional. So all the ads are like, people in offices like being, whisked off to other worlds. PS3, they're starting to, maybe have a family. So the games start to be about like dads with young kids. And then like PS4 hits and like God of War is about like old dad now.
Yeah.
And PS5 is like your family game. And it's going to continue all of those first party games.
Till eventually
like,
the PS8, and it's about age and retirement and death, and then Sony says, "We'll therefore make no more PlayStations." The cycle of life.
Well, it's
is
a real
complete.
it's a serious issue with, and this is something when your first party is so expensive to develop, is if you want to target new audiences, which presumably you do, that's a very tricky ship to turn around because you want to get, if you're Sony, you want people in their early 20s to be excited by PS5, which is why you see people putting so much support into things like Fortnite. Roblox hasn't happened on console yet, but I assume there's lots of conversations have happened about that. It's actually really challenging for these companies. Microsoft's the same. If you look at Microsoft, like there's a reason Halo Infinite is directly, basically it's not even a game based on Halo, it's a game based on the box art for the original Halo. It's literally that level of like specific nostalgia.
Yeah.
It's really tricky. This has to be a challenge for them of how do we get that younger audience into the consoles, because they are basically tailoring themselves for an ever-aging audience. Which,
More and more people playing on
if you
PC.
know enough about biology, you know that's not an infinite plan.
Yeah, it's I can't imagine what their jobs are like, and I'm glad I don't have to worry about it. But I had a conversation with someone in YouTube comments the other day who theorized that
Why'd you do that? Why'd you do
my
that?
community's pretty good.
Love you all.
I theorized that most people on the street, with the Uncharted movie coming out, and obviously Ghost of Tsushima movie coming out as well, have no idea what Ghost of Tsushima or Uncharted are. And they vehemently disagreed with me, of course, in a condescending way. It was like, do you know what fucking industry you work in about people not knowing Uncharted? So what I actually said was I don't think that most people on the street know who Nathan Drake is. Uncharted, I still think it's pretty likely. I think that you asked a bunch of strangers on the street, most people are going to have no idea what Nathan Drake is, what it's from, no concept.
I think
of that
Uncharted
character.
would have a similar.
Me too.
I think people would know what Uncharted is.
Nathan Drake's got to be even less than Uncharted, though. And so the idea that this movie is being made to like appeal to mass audiences as some IP that everybody knows, it's like, I don't think that's true. And they go, Alanah, do you not know the industry that you work in? Look how much money you make. So out of curiosity, I went and looked up how
This is
much
therapy. I love this.
but I like statistics. So and anytime I'm prompted to research something, I will, evidently. I looked up the highest grossing movie of the year that Uncharted 4 came out, which was Captain America, and then figured out the average movie ticket price. I can't remember the numbers that I came up with, but yes, video game industry makes more money, but the difference between the amount
It's like
of
100
people,
to 1 in terms of audience size.
oh my god, like they're so much bigger, and I feel like
Because we've not worked out how to sell a game for $10. So
or to everybody, like that's part of it, because
mobile games are the only mobile games are the closest thing that are an exception to that. You know, I think
or if
like
you go out into
Sky,
the street and ask someone if they know what Wordle is, they're going to know that. You know, that's
more likely, yeah.
Yeah,
My
that's
mom's
the
playing
thing. That's
Wordle.
why people scoff at mobile. This is why Genova, and in keeping with that trend, where I was saying that, you know, Flower was a bigger hit than Journey, and then Journey. I mean, then Flow, and then Journey more than Flower. Sky, their next game, which people largely don't know anything about here because it has like, I don't know. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but well over 100 million active players. It's far and away that game company's most successful title by probably several orders of magnitude. I mean, their studio size, Journey shipped as a studio of like 14 people, and I think they're north of 100 now. That game company is booming.
I haven't even heard of that game.
Sky, Children of
your
Light.
point, right? Sky
and
company.
I did not work on it, for the record. Vince, who also did Flower, he and I have ping-ponged, alternated with TGC titles. They spent like 7 years making a mobile game after Journey came out. It took them forever to get a mobile game released, and it's gigantic. And Genova's whole thing was, you know, look, I'm very grateful to Sony, and we were able to make 3 games in a row that were hugely, they made a big impact in the industry, and they were profitable, and they launched all our careers in that. But at the end of the day, we're beholden to how many people own a PlayStation. And he was like, everyone owns a phone. Can I bring an experience like Journey to the phone? That was his fundamental goal. And by all marks, they've succeeded. The audience size for Sky, even though it's overwhelmingly in the Asian markets, which is not surprising given that it's a mobile game, it is still, you know, just if the goal is to reach number of people as movies do and as TV does, mobile should be on everyone's mind.
I think I said this to Mike last week, but you can guarantee, I reckon, that all of the platform holders, Nintendo's obviously already done it extensively, are going to try to get their games on mobile. I feel like Xbox's strategy for that is also pretty clear with cloud streaming, less clear on what PlayStation or Sony's plan is, but I have absolutely zero doubt that every single one of your favorite franchises or IPs will end up on mobile.
Or as I said last week, or is already there and you just don't know it yet. Like, that's the other aspect, right? As an audience member.
Pathless simultaneously shipped on Apple Arcade, and they had to have a parallel sort of mini team within Giant Squid figuring out how to manipulate the mechanics of the game to fit better with holding something and touching the screen versus a controller, but it's fundamentally the same game. And it's crazy to think that this open world, 20-hour game that sings and looks beautiful on a PS5 can also run on an iPhone.
I played majority of a game that I have ranted about a bunch of times. Now I'm forgetting the name of. It's a bird game. You fly, but forgetting the name of it.
Falconeer?
Yes, thank you, Falconeer. I played majority of the Falconeer on mobile, even though I was streaming it from my Xbox. It's a Game Pass game. I played majority of it through Backbone, which is an attachment that I take with me pretty much everywhere that you just plug into either side of your iPhone and it acts as a controller. It's really comfortable. There are a bunch of them, but I really like Backbone.
Does that essentially turn your phone into a Switch?
Sort of, yeah. It's
like,
really light.
mechanically?
The Backbone one I like the most because it also comes with an app where you open up the Backbone app and then you can just like launch into whatever game you want. So I have my PlayStation streaming and my Xbox streaming both built into the Backbone app so that you just click on them. And I can do it from anywhere.
Wild.
So I can connect to my Xbox at home from anywhere that I have Wi-Fi. And I mean, it's not great everywhere, obviously. But I played, majority of that game sitting on a couch while like watching TV or movies or whatever just with the Backbone. And it works. Like we're already there. Like if that's a thing that I've already done as somebody who's otherwise, been very disinterested in mobile gaming, then they've accomplished that for sure. And yeah, like you said, Austin, everybody has a phone and everybody has all the hours that they're spending on social media. I don't doubt that marketing agencies have access to that data and they're like, this person spent 6 hours on Twitter today and those 6 hours aren't being monetized except by ads. How can we get those 6 hours? So that's where mobile games got to come in and try and sweep up the West, and I think they will. Just hasn't happened yet.
And the evidence is there that and I know that game company's whole crusade was mobile doesn't have to have an implicit quality judgment attached to it. Like we currently make that assumption. Oh, it's monetized to high hell. Oh, it's a gambler addiction framework, this and that. We have all these kind of stigmas that we associate with, and not undeservedly in many cases, but their attitude, which was the same when making Flow, Flower, and Journey, and with regard to consoles, is it doesn't have to be the status quo. Someone can make something that challenges the kind of experience that this platform is supposed to theoretically deliver to you. And
it's tricky to break through without a free game, though. That is still very much the case. There's not many.
I mean, the customer has learned,
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't blame the customer for that, but I know we're often asked to bring our games over, and we've done it with a couple, but like we found people don't want to pay for our games, at least on a phone. Like,
do you have many of your games on mobile, Mike?
Thomas was loans on mobile, or was. I think that's actually kind of decayed off of all of the platforms because the publisher hasn't updated it. But we also had we did Subsurface Circular as well, which Subsurface Circular was got lots of Apple support and did okay, but definitely was not as strong on there as it was on Switch or on PC. But we get people asking for like specifically Solitaire. Actually,
that's what I was going to say. It seems like a safe bet.
Makes perfect sense, but we would be laughed off the platform if we tried to release a $10.
You'd have to sell for $2
game on mobile.
Yeah.
No, we'd have to give it away for free and sell each suit or something. We'd have to do some kind of in-app purchase stuff. Which again, like I'm not casting shade on that. I don't think that's an implicitly bad thing, but it's definitely something I'm not capable of designing well for. I've done free to play before, in a previous life before I went indie, and I was shit at it. I
approach for
absolutely
sure.
Awful. I couldn't design for it.
I think that Erica, the FMB game that I worked on, that was originally conceived of as a mobile title. That was the first
prototype I saw was on a phone for that. Yeah, way before.
Yeah, it was like on an iPad. It was the idea is that it should be, a good sized screen, and it's very much like their tech, their like patented or whatever tech,
tactile
touch video. Like the whole point is it is video that you're supposed to touch literally. And
played great on a phone, yeah, really good.
Oh yeah, to the point that they had to kind of make some interesting compromises to make it, because they made a deal with Sony and had a launch exclusivity on PlayStation that eventually broadened out to the mobile. They had to then report it back to mobile as it had been originally conceived. And if I remember correctly, the way it's done on mobile is it's a free download that only takes you so far into the game and then effectively says,
chapters.
If you want to keep playing, couple bucks more or whatever, which I feel like is that's essentially kind of like
totally
the
reasonable.
Old demos that I used to play, in the 90s, where you'd play the first 10. Remember playing the first, I think, 5 minutes of LucasArts Full Throttle, and it was free, and I played that, and they sold a copy because of it. Like those first 5 minutes hooked me. So I feel like that's not a bad business
I do like
model.
the separation. I struggle as a designer to do free to play or that kind of in-app purchase, simply because for me, and this is true of me as a player as well, I like to pay for my ticket, and then once I'm in the theme park or the theatre, entertain me, and I don't want to be thinking about money again.
Are you into the all-inclusive resorts where you put your wallet away as soon as you arrive?
I probably would be. I've never been to one, but yeah.
Oh my God, it's amazing. I did it recently.
I don't like as a designer having to make a decision between giving someone something special and like monetizing that in the moment. I'd rather
It's because your games are not very modular,
and then
like your games are not very modular. Some games lend themselves really well to that from a design standpoint. Like if you're accruing,
they lend themselves well
stuff.
to it. But when I've worked on those kind of games at other companies, I've always struggled because I just can't like intellectually kind of solve how to like.
It's a different style.
Yeah,
but is that something that you think
like
about?
It's not a moral thing. It's just like
do you ever think about it? Do you know like actively knowing how much money there is on mobile and the size of the install? Being somebody who is effectively like I don't want to call you a small business owner. It seems bigger than small, but you run a company and you're trying to get people paid.
What
is that something that
you
think
about?
For you
calling me a small business?
Well,
it's fine.
I feel like
business,
Mike's got too many products and people. I don't know what I would consider a small business, but I don't feel like Bithell Games is a small business.
I like Moneybags Bithell. I think it's fine.
Yeah, Moneybags Mike.
I knew it.
Just put out a bunch of job listings.
I did, which has been a process. Yes, going through all of those. We need to do an episode at some point about like getting a job in the games industry. That would be a theme that people might be interested in. And I have lots of advice.
That sounds great.
About what not to do. So yeah.
Do you ever think about it? Do you think about mobile? Like, is it something that you're like, oh, we should do this? Do you feel pressure for it?
We think about it, yeah, like for exactly the reasons you're saying. Like, there's enough. We'd be foolish if we didn't. But the problem for us has always been that the kinds. It's like Austin said, like the kinds of games I tend to make, or that my team tend to make, or that the people we work with tend to make, just don't lend themselves to that kind of breaking up and piecemeal thing, because we cannot release a game. And whenever I say that in public or tweet it or whatever, there will be people who are like, I'd give you a $5, I'd give you a 10. It's like, I really appreciate that, but there has to be a lot more of you to justify the cost of doing it. And unfortunately, it seems like there are obviously exceptions to the rule, but generally that's not how it's done. So for us, it's something we talk about every now and again. I'm sure we'll probably do it again because it's actually a really pleasurable experience. Doing a mobile version of a game, you avoid so much of those systems are so much smoother usually than console backends and stuff. So it's actually quite nice often to do a port to mobile. It's going to be quite an enjoyable experience in a nerdy way. But
I would never have guessed.
It's way easier. And that's so it's fun to do, but no, it's just finding the right thing. And I think, to be honest, when people from the console or PC side go to the mobile side in kind of an arrogant way and go, we've got real games, we're going to bring one of our real games over, it always falls on its arse because they don't know the audience, they don't know the marketplace, they don't know anything about it. There's an arrogance that often kind of comes over with people coming from different spaces. So if we were to do a mobile game, it would be from the ground up, planned for mobile, thought through for mobile. Much like that games company seems to have done there with that game, like we would be actively coming to the system on its own terms and that audience on what they want. I think I've seen too many developers fail by like going, we're gonna bring our first person shooter to mobile and it'll be exactly the same and real gamers and all this stuff, and it's like, I'm not sure that's true.
A very cool thing about this, Austin, about Sky, that's on their Wikipedia. So it's called Sky Children of Light, like you said. And they've held a bunch of in-game events in support of charity and have raised millions of dollars through in-game events in Sky, which is super cool. They've done Earth Day, so they have in-app purchases where each in-app purchase was used to plant one tree. That resulted in 40,000 trees being planted in the Amazonian and Australian forest damaged by wildfires. And then in May 2020, they did Days of Healing. They raised $719,000 for COVID crisis fund. And then June they did Days of Rainbow event, raising money for Pride, and raised $794,000, which is so cool. Like, what
also,
the basis
of their monetization is buying things for other players.
No way.
So
that's nice. That's a nice way of doing it.
Yeah, it's less about I can have this cool, like in Star Trek Fleet Command, I can get that cool ship I want, or I can mine resources faster. It's like, I can give this person this gift, and deck out their space, that kind of thing.
That's so cool.
Conceptually speaking, I don't know the full extent of how their monetization works.
Yeah.
I just know that was part of the initial idea from the earliest days that I heard about it.
It also has pretty good review scores, but it's interesting to note that it didn't get on all the main publications that your average I don't know what a console PC game would. Like it's on Edge, Game Informer. It is on a lot of them actually. But it's stuff like Nintendo Life Pocket Gamer. It doesn't have as many reviews on Metacritic as we're used to for even like your AAA entry that's on console or PC, which I guess.
Well,
is
it
part
only
of that
came to
stigma.
Switch last summer.
Yeah.
And I don't actually have any idea. I assume it's on Xbox and PlayStation, but it's for sure a mobile game at its core. So
It is
It's also
not on
worth
Xbox
noting-
and PlayStation yet.
okay, yeah.
It's also worth noting that like the review that they've tried, like there's definitely like outlets that have tried to cover mobile games and do reviews and do previews and stuff like that, and it just doesn't ever seem to drive the traffic, right? Like the audience on mobile, they don't really care what like
They're just gonna go play it.
website thinks. They're going to play it for free. They're going to find out for themselves, or they're going to wait for a recommendation from a mate. Like,
Or you just look in the
it's
store and the
there's not that
storefront-
look to authority.
Yeah.
You see how many stars it has on the storefront,
True.
and that's all you need, really. You know, it's like, because I always look and I say, oh, this is 4 stars, but 500,000 reviews. Like, that's a pretty thorough sample size for my taste. You know, click. That's
Right.
about all
Same
I
as
need. I
Amazon.
don't-
Whereas gamers look to critics still. Like gamers really care what like the Metacritic is or what the IGN score is or whatever. Like they really, really care in a way that's not true of that more mainstream audience.
Austin, before we head off today, I wanted to ask, because we've like kind of touched on it here. How did you
What
feel
about
about
Grant? Do you need to know?
How did you feel about
Secrets.
last week's news? You said when we were organizing you didn't have a ton of input, but like, did you have any
About
immediate
Microsoft?
thoughts? Yeah, about Microsoft purchasing Activision Blizzard.
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, it surprises me in the obvious ways, but at the same time, it's like, of course, these things happen, but yeah, I remember thinking, you know, I of course, first thought I always wonder is what implications this might have for my end of things, just from the standpoint that part of the way a composer makes their way through the business is that different publishers have different internal norms, and sometimes that can be leveraged to your advantage, where it's like, well, you know, this studio, I'll just make something up, like Ubisoft gave me this, and now I'm talking to you, Microsoft, and, you know, these deal terms or whatever, we're fine with them, you know, how much of a conversation can we have about them, that sort of thing. And there's a healthy thing that emerges where everybody having kind of their own take, sort of, you know, it's kind of like genetic diversity in the world of evolutionary biology. Like you want the maximum amount. And so there is, of course, the aspect of, well, if more and more places are going to do business the way Microsoft does, that would potentially have implications. Because there's definitely, I can't say any specifics, but there's certainly things that Microsoft does differently than anybody else. And that would just mean that many more titles are going to follow suit that way. So I remember looking at that and going, that ought to be interesting. I don't know. It's so speculative if or how that would matter, or if they would even get involved in those kinds of things for their subsidiaries at that point. But, you know, all the rest of my reaction was basically just wait and see. I don't. To
To be clear,
try to
pretty
make
much
it my-
same.
Yeah, I
We were
don't
like
try to make it my
speculative.
business.
I don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, it's hard to say. You know,
Beware
sometimes-
anyone who tells you a certainty about the future of the games industry,
True.
right? Like those are the people to stop listening to.
True.
Yeah, I saw a friend of mine on Twitter just an hour ago write, I want to pitch a GDC talk that does a recap of every prior GDC talk that made bold predictions about the future of the industry and got it wildly wrong.
Yeah.
You know, like everything now is all about this or is all about that. And
Single player's dead. Single player is all that matters. Single player's dead. Single
Yeah,
player is all that
exactly.
matters. Yeah.
yeah. So I there, you know, you could do a lot. And that's not to say that there's some people in the world whose job it is to make those predictions. And they hopefully are, you know, moderately more informed than the rest of us in doing
And
so.
they're
But-
also good. Like, there's a lot, like, Pactor's right more than often than he's wrong. You know, those kind of people, there are some, they're wrong occasionally, but, like, there's or often, but, like, the odds usually on the predictors are
Yeah, I would
are
say
better
Pactor
than
is usually pretty on point
at
specifically.
random. Yeah.
But you can't be perfect. That's not how that kind of thing works. And yeah, I mean, that's a lot of what Mike and I said last week. And we both got some tweets about it where I was just like, well, if I didn't comment on this, it's because I have no fucking idea what I'm talking about. And like,
People
nobody.
don't like that. They want us to be pundits
Although,
along.
nobody
fair,
does,
They want us, you're smart. You're not smart if you, unless you say with absolute certainty
Wild
exactly what's going to
predictions.
happen, then
Yeah.
you're an idiot. As,
Fair.
you need
Also,
be a pundit these
to be
days.
fair, I wasn't here last time because I had nothing to say. That was incidental. I had already booked that time with something.
Oh, yeah.
And
I mean,
so-
we organized it so
Austin
last
said,
minute.
"Fuck you, Alanah," in the
Yeah.
texts, and I was very offended. Like he was just incredibly rude and dismissive. It's a shame. It's a shame.
That's why I have him
exactly.
blocked now.
Yeah,
And that's why
exactly.
Grant came
I think
in.
Alana's being very big, frankly, having you back on the show, Austin, after what
welcome.
you said.
True. Well, I had to.
so.
There was a PayPal related transaction. No, I watched. I sat through all 49 or whatever minutes of your Grant video. Very curious. Waiting, just looking for that thing I can exploit. Sadly, neither of you gave me anything, but I will. I will. There was one thing that he glossed over that you raised that I thought in 30 seconds, if I can remember it, I will put this to bed. He talked about how something he worked on, and I can't remember what it was, if it was Banjo-Kazooie or something, ended up in a TV show where they were playing it.
Banjo-Kazooie, yeah.
Okay, they were playing it on screen, and he made royalties from that. And there was something about the way you phrased it that made it sound like, oh, it's a good thing somebody mentioned blah, 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 that like as if that was sort of good luck on his part that was a known...
Yeah, so the thing was that it wasn't visible in the episode, nor was it audible in the episode, but somebody had written down on some sheet somewhere that it was Banjo-Kazooie that he was playing, and thus he got royalties for it.
Yeah, and so just for the sake of broadcasting some insider education to the universe, that is definitely contractually required. That is and whenever a film or a TV show is like the world of publishers in film and TV is referred to as distributors, but it's the same thing. A video game publisher is a movie distributor. They're the same fundamental concept of give us your content, we will bring it to the world. And distributor deliverable requirements have what's called a Q sheet, which is a spreadsheet that lists every single piece of original and licensed music in that, with all the writer or writers and whoever controls the publishing interests on that piece of music, whether it's a record label or a music publisher, and has all of their information logged. And then this gets blasted out to organizations that track TV and theatrical broadcasts and stuff all over the world through what are called performance royalty organizations. Like in the US, we have ASCAP and BMI and CSAC, and in the UK, you have PRS, et cetera, et cetera.
Alana's going to turn into dust
I
very
know, yeah,
quickly.
seriously, what's going
we
on
need
there?
to-
The sun's reflecting on the building that is directly across from me.
Your whole contrast shifted dramatically.
like burst into flame any second.
So all of a sudden, why at 2:20 p.m.? How strange.
Because I bring it up because I had the same thing happen.
My thing was, if it's not audible, I actually assumed that nobody was actually playing Banjo-Kazooie.
it just means it was
someone just
low in
wrote
the
it.
mix. It wasn't. It just means that they licensed it. They got the clearance to put it in their thing, and then when they went to go make their final actual mix, it's down so low that you, for all intents and purposes, can't hear it.
Basically
But I
can't hear it.
guarantee you they did, because I had the exact same thing happen where you get these quarterly statements of here are your royalties you earned, and most of them it's if you make good money, it's because you have 1 billion 1 penny transactions.
Yeah.
Because so much of it is just a little money here, a little money there, and like literal pennies of a movie that a little independent movie that I scored played on TV in Lithuania. Here's your $6, that kind of thing. So that's why it's all about long-term growing of a catalog more than it is the one big score. Although if you
I knew a guy in my youth who always had beer money because he was an extra in Gladiator.
Wow.
well,
Extra
yeah,
in Gladiator,
SAG
and he paid for
royalties
his
or
Friday
whatever.
nights, basically. Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. So I some Hulu show that I never heard of, there's a scene where a guy is playing Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and it is, you do see a flash of it on screen. So they do license the game, and including in that, they separately licensed my score, because I never heard of this thing, and I got like 9 cents for some Hulu show where I was like, what is it? And I went and I pulled it up, and I cranked my speakers as loud as they would go, which is scary because they get very loud. And I could barely hear anything. I definitely would never been able to identify that it was mine. But the guy is playing Syndicate, so anyway, I just wanted to make it.
And game devs, if it strikes you as unreasonable that you don't get a cut every time a game you worked on is on TV, then that's a really good reason to look into the differences between the history of the music industry and the games industry and what composers have done over the years in order to get those rights. I had to go a bit lefty for a second there.
The funny thing is that it's not through unionization, because composers are forbidden from unionizing in the U.S.
Right, but some composers made that happen by taking action to do so.
There's no question that performance royalties are a thing that were involved legislatively in their creation. Although I do believe it is not actually legally required. It is just industry best practice. It is considered a default minimum, but there's no enforcement agency associated with that. Like, you can't sue if somebody denies you those royalties, assuming that it's contractually okay that they deny you that. Obviously, you can sue if they break the contract. But I think that it's basically just, I could be slightly wrong, but I'm pretty sure that like the rates are set in terms of what just broadcasters have to pay. But I do believe that if Sony Pictures hires me to score a Spider-Man movie, they are not legally required to give me what's referred to as the writer's share. The 50% of the royalties that music generates would be retained by me as the writer. They would keep the other 50% as the distributor, as the publisher. But I don't think they're required to do so. It's just that's the way business is done, and they know that if they try to break that, it's more drama than it's worth, basically.
So it's not unionization, but via pressure applied by the larger group, you maintain certain rights in addition to your legal rights. But it's not a union.
Are you saying that as if you think I'm anti-union?
No. I'm saying it's very union-y.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's union adjacent. It's the idea of group action for the individual.
Yeah, I have no. For a long time, I was a proud member of the Musicians Union, which is adjacent to the.
You said composers aren't allowed to be in unions. That's interesting.
We're considered employers more than employees.
So that's right.
That makes sense. Yeah, you're managers, so yeah, you're not allowed. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's not by law. It's not legislatively that way, and it's not even a Supreme Court precedent. It's it's like a federal court one layer below, and it never got appealed, but it is considered the default standing at the moment. And they've tried repeatedly to overturn that. The Teamsters even agreed to be the sort of catalyzing force to unionize composers, but it's never worked. But the Musicians Union, the performers, the recording musicians, conducting, orchestration, all of that, there are union job, like that is a union job for sure.
It's impressive what we can do when we work collaboratively to enforce norms or create norms.
Huge fan.
That treat people better.
I was on the board of directors for years of the Society of Composers and Lyricists for that exact reason. Eventually, they just had too many meetings. I couldn't keep up with it, so I was like, I gotta focus on my own career, guys. But it was amazing because a lot of the other folks on the board, like Charles Bernstein, who's the original composer of Nightmare on Elm Street, and people like that who have been around the business for a long, long time, and they've seen all the trends and the rises and falls, and when the going's been good and the going's been bad, and the insights that you get from hanging out with a group like that is incredible, and absolutely drives home the idea that as composers, that the few thousand of us that there are, kind of. And even less potentially if you just restrict it to the U.S., but thinking globally, it's such a niche thing that absolutely it's in our interest to try to figure out what are some things that we can kind of collectively agree on and try to, if not standardize, at least suggestively evangelize. And I'm all for that.
That's great. No, and I think there's a lesson in that to other creatives in other fields, including video games.
For sure.
Yeah.
On that note, hi everybody, welcome to Play, Watch, Listen. I'm Alanah, Pearce. I'm a video game writer. That's Mike Bithell. He's a video game director, and that's Austin Wintory. He's a video game composer. Troy is not here.
Troy was in a session this morning. Yeah.
I don't want to speak on behalf of him, but because people have asked, I have no intention of kicking Troy off of this show. There's definitely not a thing that I have any intention of doing. But I don't imagine he's spending a whole lot of time on Twitter right now, from my perception. So
he and I are working on a thing together that is heavily monopolizing our time.
That's true. I know, like, before the episode we recorded with him, he had mentioned having to disappear for the next month for something anyway. But
his dance card is wild right now. It's very, very, very full.
That's good.
Cool. We will see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.